In South Africa, we have so many names for the humble taxi. The Quantum, the Siyaya, the Zola Budd, the Sesfikile, and the But the one thing we can all agree on is that the taxi industry has for decades been completely defining of South African life. Whether it be the millions of people that it transports every day, the billions of rands that it pulls in, the culture that it defines, and the violence and problems that come with it. For nearly a century, a set of iconic vehicles have transported South Africans from one side of the country to another, and in doing so, shaped all of our lives. So, please join me as I track through the iterations of the iconic South African taxi. The taxi industry has a long and extremely complicated history in this country, but in doing the research for this video, I think I can identify three distinct eras of the taxi, and each era is defined by an iconic vehicle. And the first one is the Chevy Impala. You see, between the 1930s and the 1970s, South Africa went through a fundamental change. Millions and millions of particularly black South Africans moved to urban areas to seek work. The racist colonial and subsequent apartheid governments were really determined to keep these people on the outskirts of the cities, far away from any possible work opportunities. These growing township populations were stuck far away from their jobs with very little help from the apartheid-associated public transport systems like the buses or the trains. And in the face of this racist persecution, the black majority said, fine. If you're not going to give us a public transport system, we're going to make one ourselves. They couldn't drive their own buses and minibus taxis because that would mean they would need permits from the apartheid government, meaning even more persecution. So they opted to find the largest sedans that they could. And when you're looking for a large sedan, you'd always turn to America. These cars were massive inside and out, and they had these very long bench seats, meaning you could stuff even more people into them, but you could still viably claim that that was your own personal car. There are even stories of police officers pulling over these taxi drivers, and the taxi drivers went, oh, no, that's my family. That's my uncle, my aunt, my nephew. It's completely fine. And apparently it worked. Cars like the Chrysler Valiant and the Dodge Monaco were extremely popular, but the car that came to define this era was the Chevy Impala. It had a massive interior for as many passengers as possible and had really soft floaty suspension to help handle both the added weight of the new passengers and also South Africa's incredibly rough roads. The car even picked up the nickname the Six Mabone, referring to the iconic 6 headlights in the back. The Impala period lasted until the mid-70s, when one piece of legislation changed the industry forever and brought about the chapter of a car that I do feel like any South African could identify. You see, in 1977, the apartheid government approved the Road Transportation Act. It came with a bunch of changes to our transport laws, but the specific one that matters here is it defined a bus as holding more than 9 passengers at a time. So the taxi driver said, great, we'll just find vehicles that only have 9 seats, and they turned to the Volkswagen buses and the Datsun E20. But no car was more important to this era than the Toyota Hiace. The Hiace had been around since 1967 as the ultra-utilitarian van to rival other vans like the Nissan Homie. It used the one-box design, which had been around for a while, which uses the maximum footprint of the chassis for interior space, making it incredibly versatile and efficient. It was also a cab-over design, meaning the running gear didn't impede on the cabin much, mainly underneath the seats, making it even more effective as a taxi. For the second generation, most of the versions of this car had 10 seats, so the taxi operators just took out one of the seats and it was perfect. The other options like the Datsun E20 also had these benefits, but the Toyota had 2 major things going for it. Firstly, they'd been building cars in Mzansi since 1972, meaning that they had a very advanced support network for their products, meaning it was simple and cheap to fix in comparison to their international counterparts. Secondly, this fixing did not have to happen often because of Toyota's legendary reliability. The second generation Hiace came out in 1977 and was an instant hit with people looking to exploit the new regulations because they were so effective and so reliable. They were so unbreakable that South Africa actually came up with a brand new nickname for these Hiaces. At the time, there was a young South African woman tearing up the long distance running scene. She was so good that she seemed like she could run forever, much like the reliable Hiace. So the third generation earned the name Zola Budd. The second and third generations of the Hiace dominated the South African taxi industry from the late 70s. The industry was hectically deregulated again in 1987, leading to an explosion in the taxi industry, with the Hiaces leading the charge. Taxis became so crucial to South African life that it started to impact other areas in the country, not just transport. Informal food sellers found a prime audience at taxi ranks, selling food to waiting customers and oftentimes developing small businesses from it. The taxi also became a sign of resistance because commuters were trying to boycott the apartheid-associated public transport networks like the buses and the trains. So to take a taxi became an act of defiance against the apartheid state. The music played in taxis became trend-setting for black youth, and the music tended to love the taxis back, with songs like Brenda Fassie's Zola Budd immortalizing the humble Horace. The Horace turned into a true South African icon. By the way, check out Brenda Fassie's Daily Driver from 2000. It is a Oxford Green E36 BMW 325i convertible. This woman had incredible taste. In 1994, Toyota started fully producing the third generation Horace in South Africa, rebranded as the Siyaya, and they sold it here until 2007. However, the Horace's days were numbered as the new government established the Taxi Recapitalization Scheme and set new safety standards for any taxis sold after 2006. And these safety standards included seatbelts for all passengers and rollover protection. It's shocking that that was not standardized to begin with. The Siyaya did not meet these basic standards, so this brings in our third chapter and our final iconic vehicle. Because in 2005, Toyota introduced the fifth generation of the Horace, but we all know this diva as the Quantum. Quantum is a South African specific name referring to the passenger version of the Horace, and it's been produced in Toyota's Durban plant since 2012. The Sesfikile version was specifically designed for the new taxi laws and has the iconic South African flag detail streaming along the side. The model either uses the 2.7 petrol 4-cylinder or the 2.5-litre diesel shared with the Fortuner lineup. It also kept the cab over one box principles and the square headlight design language from the Siyaya, but this time with 14 to 16 seats for huge passenger capacity. The Quantum Sesfikile maybe does not hold the same universal love as the Siyaya and the Impala does because of the brazen driving style of its drivers and also its association with the modern day taxi industry. Despite the democratic government trying to regulate the taxi owners consistently since 1994, the now massive taxi conglomerates have 2/3 control over public transport. The taxi bosses can essentially do whatever they want, and if the government tries to pressure them, they'll just call a strike that can grind South Africa to a halt. These bosses also put immense pressure on their drivers to meet trip targets, leading to incredibly dangerous driving, which regularly ends in some pretty horrible crashes. Despite this, the Quantum has become an icon in its own right, continuing the legacy of the Horace. It's not just that it's been reliable for people's daily commutes, but it's diligently delivered South Africans to some of their most special memories. Whether it's traveling home to see your family in rural Eastern Cape, partying on a beach in KZN, or getting to Soccer City for the Soweto Derby, it's likely that a Quantum was used to get most South Africans there. And that's something that I think binds all of these cars together. They may all be taxis, but they're fundamentally different vehicles. The jump from the covert Impala to the loophole Horace was huge, as was the move from the utilitarian Siyaya to the safer, more powerful Sesfikile. But what binds these three machines together is their mission. They were exactly what South Africa needed at the time. An act of self-resilience, a site of resistance, and a purveyor of culture. It's hard to argue that anything has impacted South Africa more in terms of economy, culture, and the lives of everyday citizens than these three vehicles. The three faces of the iconic South African taxi.